It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, and thank you for being here. As this final episode of 2025 reaches you, I hope you all had a Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah. And I'm looking forward to spending 2026 with all of you as we celebrate our 8th season of Don't Quill the Messenger, with new guests, new topics, some returning guests, and a brand new Quiller opportunity to join us in London, England, May 8th through the 10th for our Shakespeare and the Law Symposium at Gray's Inn. What an incredibly exciting year we have ahead of us, Quiller Nation. I have to say, I'm also super excited for you to listen to this episode because it is a demonstration of one of the key ways we will eventually get to the bottom of this great literary mystery. Dr. Garrett Jackson at Appalachian University in North Carolina is doing something extraordinary. He is teaching the Shakespeare authorship mystery to law students there as part of a detailed exercise in evidence, argument, and jury presentation. Dr. Jackson spent the full semester introducing his students to the mystery and the various prime suspects for the authorship of the works of Shakespeare. Students were then eventually assigned to select a candidate they were expected to argue both for and against as part of their final presentations. Recently, I had the great privilege of joining the class on a Zoom call as a guest, available to answer some of their questions about the authorship mystery. And the exchange was both invigorating and encouraging, as these brilliant young minds fully embraced the mystery with very little prejudice for the orthodox narrative and very open minds to exploring the available evidence. What follows is a recording of our exchange. Enjoy.
This is our Honors College Quiddities and Quillets Shakespeare and the Law course. As I told you when we met a couple weeks ago, they have voted that we should rename the course, and I completely agree. It was Carter's idea, Shakespeare on Trial, because many felt like it really wasn't marketing itself well as a law course, which is true. But putting Shakespeare on trial is really at the heart of the course. And so totally agree with that. And we voted to rename it that for the next cohort that will come in fall of next year. So without further ado, I'm going to have Stephen introduce himself and tell you guys a little bit about yourselves. And then I have the following individuals who will start us off with questions: Diego, Jonas, Megan, Julia, Claire, Katie, and Ray. Okay.
Well, hopefully Ray will be finished with his burrito by the time his question comes up. Making me hungry, brother.
Hopefully. Really good.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Sable. I came to the Shakespeare authorship question through my history as a theater artist. I have been an actor since I was the age 9. And I've been a producer-director for more than 30 years. I have produced and directed almost 200 productions, and more than 75 of them have been Shakespeare plays. So I came to the scholarship, as it were, of Shakespeare authorship from an artistic perspective. I believe it's important to know a lot about a writer in order to really understand their work. I believe that all writing is autobiographical in nature, whether we want it to be or not. And I think by understanding the life behind the work, it brings a greater depth and enrichment to the performances on the stage of the actors who are portraying the characters. And so that's why this is something that is near and dear to me, that I'm passionate about. I have been the host of Don't Quill the Messenger for almost 8 years now. We're approaching the end of our 7th season. We have more than 170 episodes and about 25 bonus episodes in our library, which amounts to hundreds and hundreds of hours of discussion about this topic. My forum is open and available to all authorship skeptics, so I have had a variety of guests. Some are Marlovians, some are Baconians, some are Nevillians. Some believe in Stanley, some believe in Oxford. Most, if not many, do believe the Earl of Oxford is the primary suspect, as it were, in this literary mystery, this case, this trial, as it were. He stands to, in my opinion, the most evidence is against him, as it were, to be guilty of the crime of writing the works of Shakespeare. I'm not the creator of the podcast. The creator is sort of a co-creation between myself and my producer, Jake Lloyd Bacon, ironically, is his name. And he's not a Baconian, though. Anyway, he is the creator of the Dragon Wagon Radio Network, and Don't Quill the Messenger is proud to be just one of the many podcasts that you can find on the Dragon Wagon Network. And you can go to Dragon Wagon Radio and find all the different podcasts there. You might be interested in some of the others as well. So there's a little bit of background and history and who I am, and I'm more than happy to be here and grateful to all of you, especially grateful to Dr. Jackson for creating a course like this and for promoting exploration and thought and intelligent discussion and debate on a topic I think is super important to the Western world and Western civilization, quite honestly. And thank you to all of you for being here and for sticking with the class and bringing your minds and perspectives to the topic and the discussion. Who's first?
Great. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. And yes, totally agree. Thank you all for being here in this class. You all really made it fun for me. Despite me probably not making it much fun for you all with assignments. But all right, so we're going to kick it off with our first question. Diego, you ready to go?
I absolutely am. I just wanted to ask, because I think we were talking about it in a prior class with Bacon and just introducing this new suspect that we're learning about. Why, do you think in general people don't really go for a collaborative theory of the Shakespeare authorship question and really think that it's just one person? I don't know, because to me, just what I've been presented so far, it seems very likely that these great minds, these suspects, all in some way were able to collaborate. And it's equally as likely that some wrote some works of Shakespeare and then some wrote others. I don't know why. Why isn't it that collaborative theory?
Well,
why do people not believe in it?
I actually do believe that there was a lot of collaboration involved in the creation of what I believe is the brand known as William Shakespeare. And it's important to note that in the earliest days of the printing, remember the name Shakespeare doesn't come on the literary scene until 1593 with the publication of Venus and Adonis. That's the first work that we see printed with the name Shakespeare. And remember, for the very early portions of the identity of that name, it was spelled with a hyphen, Shake-Spear, which I think immediately gives us an indicator that it is a pen name. I think it's a brand created by the Earl of Oxford and several others who were in his camp for the very purpose of sending out what I believe is the greatest propaganda ever written in the history of the English language. And the history plays particularly are full of propaganda that is meant to create a sort of British nationalism. It's meant to strengthen the Tudor claim to the throne and puff up Elizabeth. Don't forget, at the time, she has already been named the heretic queen. The Catholic Pope has already given dispensation to anyone who can murder her as being free from the sin of murder because of her heresy and because she is the now queen of this Protestant nation. So you have this great writer who I believe was commissioned by her to use his talents to help her maintain her power and to rally the English together against the threat of the Spanish Armada. So I do believe that there is a group, but I also believe that just like in today's day, when you have a major publication of any kind or a volume of any kind, or even a newspaper, for instance, there is an editor-in-chief. There is somebody who is the, big decision maker. Same with theatrical production, right? The director, I tell my actors all the time, the theater is not a democracy. It is a benevolent dictatorship. I am the king of the throne. You are on my stage. And yes, I want collaborative effort between me and the artist. I want to talk about their interpretation of the character, my vision for the play, and how that combines and connects to make the best presentation. Nonetheless, ultimately, at the end of the day, my decision reigns supreme. Yes, you can do that. No, you cannot do that. And I think that that is part of what we're looking at when we look at the Shakespeare canon. I think we had a man who was in charge, but was also smart enough to know that if he gathered around him some of the best writers of the day and age, that he could accomplish his goals better. And I think that that's what happened. And if you look at it, you have the Earl of Oxford, who is, for his time, known as the greatest patron of the arts, with books dedicated to him, translations dedicated to him writing the prefatory essays and openings to many of these books and publications, him employing some of the great writers of the time like Anthony Munday, John Lilly, John Fletcher. I think you had this sort of collection of writers, not unlike you have today in modern films and television shows, for instance. Look at the group of writers who sat around and created Seinfeld, the group of writers who sat around and created the show Larry David, sort of a spin-off version, right? There's still a group of writers that are handling Saturday Night Live. There are groups of writers who surround all of our late-night talk show hosts and help them create their work. But whose name gets put on it? When Jimmy Kimmel delivers a monologue, it's Jimmy Kimmel's name on it, even though there might have been 4 or 5 people behind the scenes who helped write the jokes.
Yeah. Awesome. Good question. Thanks, Diego. Next, we'll go to Megan.
So Dr. Jackson mentioned really briefly in class that the quality of evidence behind Edward de Vere was maybe not as strong as other candidates, but the volume of evidence was really substantial. Is there maybe a specific piece of evidence that keeps you an Oxfordian or defending the Earl of Oxford as the author?
When it comes to like individual pieces of evidence, no, Dr. Jackson's correct. It would be very difficult. We always wish that we had something that we call a smoking gun, right? His fingerprints on the murder weapon, so to speak. And unfortunately, we don't have that. But I would say that the thing that stands out to me and has continuously stood out to me over time are all of the moments in the canon that can be traced to his biography. And so what we find is we either have one of two things. Either we have a writer who knew this man and his life so well that he was chronicling his life, both the trials and the tribulations, as well as some of the better moments in his life, were being chronicled through these works, or he himself is the originator, the creator of the works. It needs to be one or the other. There are just too many moments in the plays that are specific to the life of the Earl of Oxford. And I think when you look at like the most autobiographical of the plays, many people would point to Hamlet, mainly because that one is probably like the best known piece of literature other than the Bible in the history of English literature. The King James Bible and Hamlet. there are a lot of people who believe that they were both written by the same man. So that's a whole nother topic of conversation, right? But also there are other plays that are more obscure, but that are filled with references to the life that he led and that the things that he went through. All's Well That Ends Well is one that's very particularly connected to the details of his life, his marriage, his first child, his need to run away and go off and travel the continent. There also, I think the very specific thing that you have to look at is whoever wrote the works of Shakespeare obviously knew Italy extremely well. 13 out of 37 plays are set in Italy. And the details that you can find in those Italian plays are unmistakable to someone who stood foot in those Italian cities. And so a lot of candidates are immediately disqualified if they haven't actually traveled to Italy. And we know that the Earl of Oxford spent 16 months on the continent during a very tumultuous time of his life and a growth period of his life that I think is reflected over and over again in the works.
Yeah, great question, Megan. Thank you. Next, Julia.
Given that there's like a lot of evidence for this guy versus a lot of the other potential authors, how do you justify this specific author having written Shakespeare compared to the others and like disregard the other evidence in a way?
Well, again, it goes back to the same answer that I just gave about his biography and the details of his life. Like, we can use some really interesting ones. For instance, in Hamlet, people have a real hard time figuring out why did the author insert moments into the play where the protagonist of the story is abducted by pirates and then dropped naked, as the script says 3 times that the word naked is used, dropped naked on the shores of Denmark by the pirates. They don't kill him. They steal everything he owns and strip him of all of his goods and belongings, but then drop him on the shore. Well, that actually happened to the Earl of Oxford on his way back from his travels in Italy. He was abducted by Dutch pirates. Once they discovered who he was, they didn't kill him. They instead dropped him off on the coast of Britain naked. When they say naked, doesn't mean he was absolutely, butt naked, but without all of his finery, in just his underclothes, and all of the goods and things that he had hoped to bring back were confiscated. In fact, the Queen of England wrote to the King of Holland at the time, right? The Netherlands, these Dutch pirates. She wanted some of his stuff returned, and some of his stuff did get returned because she interceded, including a brace of pistols that he had brought back specifically for her. And when he told her, I had this beautiful gift for you, but the pirates stole it all, she said, well, we'll see about that, won't we? That's a true story in his life. And it shows up in Hamlet as this like really weird reference that can only be tied to his real life. I think is just one great example. Also, let's take the example that everybody on any side of any aisle believes that the character Polonius in Hamlet is modeled after William Cecil Lord Burleigh, who was Edward de Vere's father-in-law. And then you have Hamlet and this weird relationship that he has with Ophelia, Polonius's daughter, right? And think of even the name Ophelia, philia, meaning daughter. Like his words, that's an Italian word, right? So here he is like incorporating language as well into the work. Sometimes there are Greek origins, sometimes Latin origins, sometimes Italian, sometimes Spanish. Whoever wrote these works obviously was multilingual as well. And so you have to start looking for who could speak and read in 4 or 5 different languages. And if you can't, then you're also disqualified from being considered the author, I think.
Yeah. Great question. Great answer. Thank you. All right, Claire.
Hi. I was wondering, earlier this week we discussed the possibility that Oxford was an illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth. And we also discussed that Bacon might have been as well. So do you think they were aware of this connection? And did they kind of run in the same circles? Did they know each other? Is there any way they could have worked together on the works of Shakespeare?
I don't know about the parentage. I do know that for some reason Francis Bacon was definitely considered a favorite, and for some reason there is evidence that Francis Bacon seemed to believe that he had some sort of royal blood. There is reason to believe that Edward de Vere also believed that he had royal blood. There seems to be evidence that he believed he was the son of Thomas Seymour, and at the time would have been Princess Elizabeth. And we do have evidence, written evidence, that Thomas Seymour did take advantage of, let's use that term, the Princess Elizabeth while she lived within his home. There's one specific reference to him using a knife to cut her clothing off of her in the garden in front of his wife. So there was probably this sort of weird threesome going on between them. You're talking about Renaissance polyamory, I guess, maybe was happening there. So there's that evidence. And it seems Edward de Vere, especially sometimes his signatures had like crowns and there's references to royalty. So it appears that he may have believed he was the son of Seymour and Elizabeth. I think the evidence definitely demonstrates that he believed that the Earl of Southampton was his son by Elizabeth. And I think that there's a stronger argument and stronger evidence to be made that that is true. We definitely know that Edward and Elizabeth had a torrid affair. He was her favorite for quite some time. He was her jousting champion. He was her preferred dance partner. They shared a love for music, and a lot of people don't know this, but Queen Elizabeth was quite a musician, including, and if you look in the sonnets, you see that there's references to the Dark Lady of the Sonnets tickling the keys of what would have been probably a harpsichord back then. With her fingers, and there's an elaborate, beautiful sonnet about how he wishes that he could be the keys beneath her hands, beneath her fingers. So I think that there are a lot of folks who get really scared of these theories. They call them the Prince Tudor theories. There's a movement now that I think is a little better defined called the succession theory, and I think that makes more sense because I think we're desensitized today at how important the topic of succession was to them. Especially, you're talking about a country that had a history of horrible, horrible civil wars that led to the deaths of countless Englishmen killing Englishmen. And I think that what you see in the Shakespeare canon is somebody who is trying desperately to avoid that happening to England again through bolstering Elizabeth, but then also trying to make sure that there is an heir. And I believe that the writer of the works of Shakespeare believed that the Earl of Southampton should have been King Henry IX. I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah. Good question, Claire. Thank you. Let's go to Jonas. Actually, you guys had your hand up. Is that why you had your hand up, Jonas?
Yes, that's exactly why.
Okay.
So hold on, bear with me.
After you sing the Arkansas fight song, you may ask your question.
No, you flipped it around.
Wait, what?
It's nothing.
All right.
Okay, fair enough.
So my question is more based on a what if scenario, and I know this may be just a little bit smidge, may be hard to somewhat answer fully.
Okay.
But mine has to kind of deal with the authorship question overall, not so much as pertaining to one person, but if someone was the main author of it, the overseer of everything, how would you think that would be in today's world? Like instead of, we're thinking, all right, this is who I think it is, and there's no solidified evidence for it. What do you think the world would be on the perspective of the plays? Would that change our perspective on it? And how would that be with the, I guess, individual groups of the people for each quote unquote authorship question person?
Okay, so if we're talking about what ifs, and I like backstory a lot. When I'm directing a play, I ask my actors to fill in the blanks of the story wherever they can, if it can be logically connected to the play we're working on. So let's take an example. For instance, we've been talking about Hamlet. That's a fun one to talk about. When we first meet Hamlet, he's known as the melancholy Dane, right? He is grieving the loss of his father. But prior to his father's death, we have a happy Hamlet, or at least we should consider that we do have a happy Hamlet. So I tell the actor who is going to play Hamlet that they need to understand what Hamlet was like before these things occur to Hamlet, before the death of his father, before his uncle is chosen king over him, before his mother marries with his uncle. What is Hamlet like? What was the relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia like? And I asked the actors who are playing Hamlet and Ophelia to get together and sort of have a conversation about what their relationship was like prior to when we, the audience, come upon the scene, right? So I think backstory is super important. So here we are as the super sleuths trying to solve this great literary mystery, right? And I think we have to use somewhat of our imaginations to sort of fill in the backstory. So here are our options, right? We have this guy from Stratford who apparently is like an alien from outer space dropped onto the earth with this knowledge of all of these magnificent topics, including royalty, falconry, shipwriting, war, military exercises, diplomacy, the way that the court politics work, like horsemanship. He knows all of it somehow and writes this magnificent canon of works just out of sheer miraculous genius, scribbling away in his little college in, Hobunk, Stratford, off in the countryside. There's one vision. There's one option that we can go with. Or we can look at this option, which is that the Earl of Oxford gathers around him these other good writers. He purchases a place that's called Fisher's Folly. This is part of the historical record. He gathers them all to Fisher's Folly, and they all spend their evenings drinking wine, eating food, getting drunk together, coming up with these stories. And he says, hey, I've got one. It's this story of Romeo and Juliet. I need some extra characters. And somebody else says, well, he needs a best friend. Okay, well, what about the cousin Benvolio? Okay, well, we're going to call him. What are we going to call the cousin? We're going to call him Benvolio because he's benevolent and he's kind and he's sort of the peacemaker of the Montague family. Yeah, but we need somebody else who sort of, sparks it all up. Well, how about another friend who is maybe like a cousin of the Duke who, hangs out with these guys, but he's not really one of the members of either family? Yeah, and he talks a lot, and he has a lot to say. Well, then we're going to call him Mercutio because Mercury is the messenger god, and he chats. He's a chatty guy like an Aquarius or something, right? Air sign, definitely, right? If you're into astrology, and they were. So I think you have this group of guys sitting around spitballing, and then there's Edward going, yes, I like that idea. No, that's not a good idea. Hey, you take this scene and see if you can clean it up. Hey, give me that scene you're working on. Let me fix it because you've got some errors here, some problems there. I think that scenario makes so much more sense, don't you? And I also feel like it's fun. It's more fun to think about. Like, I would watch that movie. Wouldn't you watch a movie based on the idea of all those guys hanging out together at like this inn, drinking ale and tossing back wine and having prostitutes come in and out and writing into the middle of the night, feverishly with their quills, ink spilling all over the table, mixing with the wine. Sometimes the manuscripts are soaked in wine or the ink and the wine mixed together, and they're like still feverishly scrawling and writing, crumbling up pages and throwing them in the fire because no, that sucks. Quit! Don't bring me that shit. Give me something better. Like, come on, isn't that a better scenario? Isn't that what you would want it to be? That's what I would want it to be.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you. Good question, Jonas. All right. Katie. Cady, Katie.
Okay, so you kind of already touched on my question a little bit about the Prince Tudor theory, but I was wondering what we know about Henry Wriothesley and what evidence we have that supports him as De Vere's child with Queen Elizabeth.
So the secret to that answer is in the sonnets, and I say that there's a reason why the traditional scholarship, the mainstream Orthodox Stratfordians tend to stay away from the poems. Like they don't really do a deep dive into the sonnets. They give you this sort of cursory thing of, oh yeah, the fair youth, the dark lady, and the rival poet. And that's all you need to know. And there are a bunch of love poems, except that many of them are not love poems at all. And I would dare you to find some of them, and I would dare you to read them to a romantic interest. And I guarantee you, like the 5 or 6 that we hear of all the time that are so sweet and shall I compare thee to a summer's day and all of that, are the only 5 or 6 that are actually love poems that would be suitable to read to a lover. The rest of them, many of them are either encouraging the first 17, for instance, which are considered to be specifically written to whoever the fair youth is, along the lines of, you must have a child. You need to produce a son. You need to produce an heir. Well, I think that when we look at those 17 poems, why would the poet write to the Earl of Southampton, you need to produce a son? Well, if the Earl of Southampton is his son, then you have a father saying to his son, give me a grandson. That makes a lot of sense, especially if the father believes that there's royal blood involved. Give me a grandson because the royal line needs to continue, right, is one example. Let's look at the invention of the name William Shakespeare in 1593 with the play Venus and Adonis. Venus and Adonis was a hugely popular piece. It was published in 1593. It went through several editions because it was flying off the shelves. It was printed again in 1594 when a second poem was also released, The Rape of Lucrece, right? Those are the 2 first big works with William Shakespeare's name on them. They both appear in successive years. They're both hugely popular. They're both dedicated to the Earl of Southampton, and in flowery ways that no other dedication existed at the time from anyone to a nobleman. Again, when we look at those dedications and we look at it through the lens of this is a father writing to his son, it starts to all make a lot of sense. I love you beyond all compare. You are the reason for my life. Now, all of you are too young to have children. I hope you don't have children yet, but I hope you will someday, because I can tell you, it is one of the most rewarding and most fulfilling aspects of the human experience. But one of the most frightening too. And you see that in the sonnets because it says it over and over again. And including there's one particular sonnet, and I can't remember which number, but he says to the reader of the poem, the subject of the poem, he basically says, you hold my heart. You have all of my heart, all that is my heart. And I have no part of my heart remaining now that you hold my heart. And I can tell you, ask any parent and they'll tell you the most frightening thing about parenthood is you suddenly realize you have this creature wandering around outside of your body and they hold your heart. Ask your parents about it, what it felt like when you were born and they suddenly went, oh my God, it's like having my heart walking around outside my body. And I need to do everything I can to protect that heart because I can't imagine how damaging it is. I know people who have lost children to death. I can't imagine. And it frightens me tremendously. I have 3 children and there is this, it changes who you are. And I believe that when you look at the sonnets from that perspective, what you see is a father-son relationship and a father who believes that his son is a king, because he also says over and over again that the subject of the poems is his sovereign and that he has a duty and an obligation to serve. So imagine you're the father of who you believe to be the rightful next king. And you grow up in this feudal society where the sovereign is the power and every subject has a duty. So it's not just your son. You're not just his father, but you're also his subject. And when we look at the sonnets from that perspective, they start to unravel and they start to really make a tremendous amount of sense, especially if the current sovereign, the queen, is the mother. So we look at Venus and Adonis, and what is Venus and Adonis about? It's about this older woman seducing this younger boy. And by the end of the story, there is a child born, right? Now, it gets sort of erotic, which is one of the reasons why it was so popular and so famous. I mean, this was like X-rated poetry back then in 1593. People were like, ooh, look at Venus being all cougary and seducing this younger guy and him trying to push her away. And she's like, no, give it to me. Bring it, buddy. And they do. She forces herself upon him. And what happens is, and according to the poem, is that there is a liquid substance that comes out, right? And what does it produce? It produces this beautiful purple flower. Well, purple is the color of royalty. What is the flower? The flower is the child of their love tryst. And it's pretty obvious when you read Venus and Adonis that that's what he's talking about. He's explaining to the Earl of Southampton how he was conceived. Right? Now let's look at the Rape of Lucrece. Some people believe the Rape of Lucrece is the Earl of Oxford explaining how his first daughter, Elizabeth, was conceived. And you have to understand the Earl of Oxford denied that his first daughter was his child, rejected his wife. They were estranged for the first 6 years of the child's life. And eventually, as the little girl, whose name was Elizabeth, starts to reach the age of 7, the Earl of Oxford reconciles with his wife Anne, accepts the little girl as his daughter, and all's well that ends well. Dun, dun, dun. That's a hint, by the way. And that play is all about that relationship, the relationship between the Earl of Oxford and his wife Anne Cecil. And there are a lot of reasons to point to that. So is the Rape of Lucrece talking about that maybe Anne Cecil was raped and the child Elizabeth was not Edward's child? He assumed that she had cheated on him and had the baby, and so pushed her aside. And it wasn't until years later when she reveals to him, like Lucrece, who keeps the shame. And what do we know about rape culture? Do you think that rape culture changed in the centuries of the ages? No. Like, what we know, right or wrong, is that women often feel that they're the guilty ones. They feel the shame. They hide the incident. They keep it a secret. They don't report it. Well, imagine what it was like in the 1580s, 1590s for women who were the victims of rape, especially in the nobility. Right? So if a nobleman raped her, what were her options? We have evidence that she tried to have the baby aborted. There are letters between doctors and her mother about abortifacient types of herbs being used or attempted to be used. Doesn't work. We see Ophelia running around in Hamlet in her madness, passing out abortifacient herbs to Gertrude and to others. We have this term today. We say you will rue the day, right? You will rue the day that you did that. Well, rue is an herb, and it's called the herb of regret. So when we say you will rue the day, you will regret the day. Well, it was also called the herb of regret because women would use it to try to force themselves to menstruate so they would miscarry a baby, because they were what? Suffering regret. And so we see this in the Rape of Lucrece. Now, another theory is that the Rape of Lucrece is actually the story of Thomas Seymour raping Princess Elizabeth and the child that comes from that union, which would then be Edward de Vere. So here are these two poems that absolutely make no sense to be dedicated to the Earl of Southampton unless the author is trying to say to the Earl of Southampton, you are a prince. You deserve to be king. And here's the story of how it all happened.
Yeah. And if I can piggyback on that a little bit, Stephen, folks, we talked, I think it was 2 weeks ago before we jumped into the Francis Bacon material, when we were kind of going through the dedicatory poems and dedications in Rape of Lucrece and in Venus and Adonis. And the one in Lucrece actually mirrors what Stephen was talking about in the sonnets about the father to son love, where they say, "What I have done is yours, what I have to do is yours, being part in all I have devoted yours." That's definitely a parent saying that. You could argue that it's a passionate romantic thing, but that is something a parent says to a child for sure. And it's mirrored there in the sonnets. So yeah. Good answer. Good question.
Whether you like it or not, gang, your parents live for you. They really do. You might not see it that way, but trust me, your parents live for you. You are their number one reason for existence. And we see that in the sonnets. It's also important to point out that the sonnets published for the first time in 1609, nobody knew where they had come from. Nobody knew who had them in their possession during that time. In 1609, they're published and they are immediately destroyed. There's 1,000 copies published, and they are immediately burned and destroyed by the government of King James at the time. Only 13 copies survived. And the 13 copies that we have, when they were found, most of them found in pristine condition, which means that somebody took them and hid them away to protect them from being burned, right? Why? Why was this considered such a treasonous book of poems? Well, because it deals with the succession, and it strengthens Henry Wriothesley's claim to the throne at a time when James has now been king for 6 years. And it's an attempt, I believe, to create, possibly even stage a coup. And it is destroyed and wiped out and fails miserably, just like the Essex Rebellion, for instance, which is what landed Henry Wriothesley in prison. And he's the only one of the conspirators of that rebellion who is not put to death. Why? Because he's a prince. Why? Because he's the queen's son. And she can't bring herself to put him to death. So she locks him up in prison and keeps him there until James becomes king. So he can't rise up and create a following. He can't be like Henry Bolingbroke, Henry IV, who usurps the throne from Richard II. He can't be like John and Richard. There are no more civil wars, right? They won't have it. And so they keep him locked up. James ascends the throne, and James' first official action as king is to release Southampton from the Tower. Why? Because it's his cousin. Yeah. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Okay, Ray, you're finished with your sandwich. You ready?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me go last there. So my question is really about what other writings did he do, and is there similarities both in style and what the subject that the Earl of Oxford, or is it that they're either different stylistically, or that he didn't have much other writings? That's my question. Thanks.
So that's a great question. And what I'll tell you is one of the things that Oxfordians point to regularly is, again, you have these two different stories. So you have this guy from Stratford who nobody knew as a writer, nobody talked about as a writer, never owned a book that we can tell, doesn't leave any books to anyone in his will. We haven't ever found any books with his name in it, or his name on it, or any notes in it, or any records of him purchasing any books. So he has zero library. His father signed his name with an X. His children signed their names with an X, except for one daughter who could scrawl out barely her first name. So now you have this illiterate family with no literary paper trail whatsoever, but this entire collection of 37 plays, 154 sonnets, and 3 epic poems are all credited to him. Or you have this other guy who wrote a bunch of early poetry in his early teens, was helping his uncle translate Ovid's Metamorphoses from Latin to English, was received multiple dedications of other translations, some from Greek into English, many from Latin into English, wrote prefatory essays and prefaces to multiple numbers of those books. But we don't know where his plays went. We don't know where his later poetry went. There's this absence of writing. So which makes the most sense? This guy who we know was a writer, who was a patron of writers, who was a skilled aristocrat, who held the second oldest title in all of England. You know, keep in mind, he's the 17th Earl of Oxford, and we're talking about the 3rd Earl of Southampton or the 3rd Earl of Essex. Imagine how many generations, 17 different people, how many years that goes back. Well, it dates all the way back to 1066 and William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror becomes king, and he creates the earldom of Oxford for the De Vere family. And now you have a guy who has held that title that has held for 16 generations before him, right? Why did William do that? Because without the De Veres, the Normans, the Norman invasion, he would have never conquered. He never would have become King of England. The same thing is true about Henry VII. It was the 13th Earl of Oxford who assisted Henry VII, Henry Tudor, with destroying Richard III and taking the throne, right? So the Oxfords are, the De Vere family is like this, tied to royalty and the history of royalty and succession in England. So when we look at De Vere's early writings, we do see a lot of similarities in style. Obviously, though, he progresses quickly as a writer. There is a great piece and the Folger Library in Washington, D.C. Holds the Geneva Bible that was owned by Edward de Vere, and an extensive amount of study has been conducted on that Bible and finding all of the little side notes and marginalia and underlined passages that then when you look at the works of Shakespeare are in the works of Shakespeare. So you look at, well, whoever wrote this, whoever was reading and writing all these notes in this Bible was obviously influenced enough to, and then put it into these plays and poems. We have Edward de Vere's copy of Herodotus, right? The histories. We know he owned Plutarch. We have evidence of him buying copies of some of the other great source material that is used for Holland's Head, for instance. These source materials, these sources that keep popping up over and over again in the Shakespeare canon can be traced to him. None of those can be traced to the man from Stratford. Now, how did Edward de Vere get access to all these great books that were being published and printed at the time when it was very expensive and a luxury item, and only the wealthiest people had libraries? Well, because he was a nobleman, because he was who he was, because he was raised in the house of William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who had one of the greatest libraries in all of Europe at the time. He did have these great tutors, the great Thomas Smith, who taught him, and when he was age 14 said, I can't teach him anymore. I have nothing more to teach him. Yeah. He graduates Cambridge at 14. He graduates Oxford at 16. I mean, he's truly a genius, right? He helps his uncle, Arthur Golding, translate Ovid's Metamorphoses. Golding dedicates it to him. Ovid is one of the prime sources of the works of Shakespeare. So we have all of these layers and layers of literary evidence that I think is important. Now, a lot of people will look at Oxford's early poems and go, oh, that's trite bullshit. That's something a teenager would write. Yes, it is. Then what? Then he just stops writing? No, his later works become the works of Shakespeare. And we look at the works of Shakespeare and we go, okay, this one's definitely an early play, not as good as this one that's definitely a masterwork. I mean, the folio version we have of Hamlet is a masterwork. That doesn't get published until 1623, but it's very close to the second quarto, which comes out in 1603, which is near the end of the life of the writer and the works coming to light. So I think that if we take Oxford's early writings, we can't do a stylometric overlay of the works of Shakespeare because it's a continuation. It's not consecutive. Does that make sense, Ray?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Thank you, Ray, for that. And thank you, Stephen. All right. I'm going to open it up to any other questions. Just raise your hand and feel free to jump in there. All right. Liz, Diego, and Jonas, you guys have a question?
You got that, Liz?
Yeah, I have a question. So it's to be understood that Hamlet and follows the Earl of Oxford's life. Like it has very similarities. Was the Earl of Oxford was his life very public? Could anyone have known that information, or was that after his passing, after all of this was published, that's when people started figuring out, connecting those dots? Or was that open information, like how now we know politicians' full lives, anyone could base literary writings off of a politician's life?
That's a great question because it definitely gives us a window into the world of the Elizabethan court at the time. Those details would have been known by many, if not all, of the members of court in the circle of Elizabeth's court, the nobility. But there's no way that the common man or the public would have had access to any of that information, right? This is not stuff that's going to be printed in newspapers, let alone there really weren't newspapers yet, right? Like there were pamphleteers who would put out pamphlets, mostly political stuff, but not like news, as it were. They obviously didn't have the internet and all of that, right? The truth of the matter is commoners really could care less about what was going on behind the scenes in the lives of the nobility. That was sort of seen as like Mount Olympus to them, right? These people who live up here and do this thing that they do. Were they in awe of it and enamored of it? Sure. Would they, line the streets to watch the parades of the nobility go by? Absolutely. Often, just as we still do today, marvel at the clothes they were wearing, right? Why do we watch the red carpet arrival of the Oscars? Do we really give a crap? Oh, but wait, she's wearing this dress. Oh, she's wearing that dress. Oh, he's wearing that tuxedo. Oh, she's barely wearing a dress. Think about it, right? We haven't really changed as human beings as much as we think we have over the hundreds of years, right? So think about that. That these details, like for instance, the pirates and the brace of pistols, him rejecting his wife and refusing to acknowledge his daughter for the first 6, almost 7 years. Those kinds of details would not have been known to the average person, the public. Within the circle of nobility, yes. And keep in mind, the circle of nobility is incestuous. This family's married to that family, which is married to this family, which is married to that family. Cousins were not considered off base for marrying each other. Why? To strengthen bloodlines. Their ideology was the more pure the bloodline, the greater the claim to the title and possibly to the throne. Today, we know through modern genetics that it's a bad idea to keep your bloodline concentrated. It leads to retardation, right? So they didn't know that, though. That's why you have a lot of rulers throughout the history of major civilizations like Egypt, like Rome, like Greece, where you have these crazy rulers who go and do crazy mad things. It's because of inbreeding, right? It's because they kept marrying together and marrying together and marrying together to keep the bloodline pure. They didn't realize what they were doing. So a lot of these families are all interrelated to each other. So of course there's a lot of gossip and there's a lot of whispering and there's a lot of going on. And a lot of these plays, these first early Shakespeare plays, were presented for the court. They were presented for the nobility first, or only. For years and years and years, many of these plays the public never saw. But the people in the audience, the queen and her court, they knew when the author was making fun of somebody in the room. That made it more entertaining, didn't it? Right? It's like constant roasts going on. If the queen laughed, you were absolved. If the queen was upset, you were in trouble. We see this in a couple of places. As You Like It, the lead character Rosalind comes out at the end and basically apologizes for the contents of the play. Puck at the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream. If we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended. That you did but slumber here whilst these visions did appear. It was all a dream. Don't be mad at us if you don't like the content of the play. Well, the very purposeful reason for that is in that particular play, you have the playwright saying to the queen, who is represented as Titania, this period of time when you were considering marrying this French duke, the Duc d'Alençon, when you were considering marrying this ass, right? And what does Bottom do? Bottom speaks French when he becomes an ass. He speaks French to the fairies. Monsieur Cobweb, Monsieur Mustard Seed, right? He's stabbing at the queen's almost marriage to the French Duc d'Alençon in front of the queen, who was sitting there in the audience watching this play, right? But what does he say? You must have been under some sort of a spell. You must have had, this must have been not you. You must have had like love juice dropped in your eyes. But as soon as you woke up, you realized that you can't marry an ass. You can't be in love with an ass, right? These references are all throughout that play, which is why at the end, Puck's like, I hope you're not too pissed off about what we wrote. Yeah. Some guy from Stratford can't do that. He couldn't get away with it, and he wouldn't know the details enough to be able to put them in the play.
All right. Yeah. Keelan, did you have a question before you head off?
Well, I was thinking I can go after Emma. Katie's just going to ask it. I'm volunteering.
Okay, that's fine.
She'll tell me everything that's going on.
Thank you. All right, Emma, go ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions. One of them is Shakespeare question related. The other one is kind of off topic. So, did the Earl of Oxford know Edmund Spenser? I just really love Spenser, so I asked this last week. But
did he know Edmund Spenser?
Was there any connection there? Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, you have Spenser and you have Sidney as well. Like these are other poets, right, who are writing poetry at the same time. You've got Johnson writing plays. You've got Marlowe writing plays. They were not in Oxford's circle. Not that we can tell anyway, but they definitely were contemporaries. Edmund Spenser's, what's his most famous work is he's the Fairy Queen, right?
The Fairy Queen?
Yeah. So, when you look at Spenser's Fairy Queen and you look at Midsummer Night's Dream, there's some cross-reference going on there where one is making fun of the other and bringing up some of those passages and including them in certain parts of the play, including you have Bottom who basically tears apart the Psalms, right? The hand of man cannot see, the eye of man cannot taste, the ear of man cannot touch. I'm getting them all out of order, but so did he, right? And it's a mockery of others who would put the Psalms into their work, like Spenser and Fairy Queen. Edward de Vere and Philip Sidney had a very well-known within the royal circles rivalry. They ended up in a fight over a tennis match. The Earl of Oxford wanted the court, and Philip Sidney was on the court and refused to give up the court. And the Earl of Oxford said, I am superior to you. I have a greater title. Get off. And it came to blows, and the Queen had to get involved, and Sidney had to apologize because, indeed, the Earl of Oxford was correct. He had the higher title. He had standing over Sidney. But that rivalry lasted for many, many years later, well until Sidney's death. And then, ironically, what happens, Mary Sidney, his sister, she has two sons. And one of them ends up married to the Earl of Oxford's youngest daughter. And so there's a healing of the rift between these two families, right? And that's what they would do. That's what a lot of these nobles would do. And the two Herbert brothers are the two men who the first folio are dedicated to. You think that's a coincidence? I don't think so. William Stanley, who was married to Elizabeth de Vere, Edward's eldest daughter, whom he eventually did recognize as his true daughter. He is one of the candidates for authorship. So what we find here when we look at Bacon, when we look at Marlowe not so much because, he wasn't a member of the nobility, but we look at Bacon, we look at Neville, we look at Sidney, we look at Stanley, we look at Oxford. These are all people who all have something in common and all travel around in the same circles. The one outlier that doesn't belong in that group at all is this Stratford man who couldn't read and write from all we can tell.
You're here. Okay. Who's next?
I'd like to ask you guys a question.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Especially you ladies who are in attendance, right? So imagine this. William Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon writes the greatest works of English literature ever known to man and never bothers to teach his 2 daughters how to read them. Does that make any sense to you? His 2 daughters couldn't read. The one could barely write her name. The other one signed her name with an X. When he dies, he leaves all of his money to his 2 sons-in-law, not his daughters. So because the man needs to control the wealth and the money and manage it for his daughters who couldn't read or write and therefore could not manage their estates, not without their husbands. Is that the same man who wrote Romeo and Juliet when Juliet stands up to her father and says, "I will not marry"? Is that the same man who wrote A Midsummer Night's Dream when Hermia stands up to her father and says, "I will not marry Demetrius. I'm going to run off with Lysander instead"? Is that the same man who created Rosalind and As You Like It, who dresses up like a boy in order to protect her and her cousin from wayfarers and then becomes a philosopher of love, teaching men how to love? Is that the same man who wrote Antony and Cleopatra and told the story of the world's most powerful woman up to the current woman, Elizabeth, Queen of England? I'd say no. I say absolutely not. If you've read Much Ado About Nothing, Beatrice is one of the best characters in the canon, and she's fabulous. Did the same man who created Beatrice refuse to teach his daughters how to read the lines and the speech of Beatrice? Who says, "I'm never going to get married to anybody because I'm too strong and powerful for men. I couldn't stand a man with a beard on his face because that's too scratchy, too itchy. And I can't stand a man with no beard on his face because what should I do with him? Dress him up in my women's clothing? Because he's just a kid. He's just a boy." Like these are the revolutionary feminist concepts that our man, William Shakespeare, whoever he was, put into print. I cannot justify in my heart, my soul, or my mind that same man would refuse. I have 2 daughters. I can't imagine him not wanting to teach them how to read his work and then maybe even perform those roles someday. What do you think, ladies? Does it make sense to you?
I have a feeling Liz has a comment for that.
Oh, yes, I do. So, as Diego and Jonas scoot back for this one, to me, it definitely does not make sense about William Stratford to have written that. But what would be the connection to De Vere with his within that female standing? Was it very well known, very well recorded that he did educate women, that he did have these empowering women figures consistently in his life, so much that during that time period where women were seen as less than and were normally uneducated, were normally in a lower power, lower standing of power, would De Vere have so many powerful female figures that he felt they deserved to be shown in the spotlight that he would have to consistently write them in his plays alongside of stories of his life?
Yes, absolutely. And what I would say is that throughout the canon, what you see is the presence of these powerful women, the powerful women who affected his life. What you see is the reflection of a young boy whose father dies when he's very young and his mother runs off and gets hastily remarried. Sound familiar? Oh yeah, Hamlet. What we see is a man who has a relationship with a woman, his first wife, whom he feels betrayed by, who he wrongfully accuses of adultery and betrayal, and then later realizes, no, she's not guilty. Well, we see that in Winter's Tale. We see that in Pericles. We see that in Much Ado About Nothing. The young hero is falsely accused, right? And then pretends to die and then comes back to life. In Winter's Tale, Hermione is falsely accused and we believe her dead. And at the end, she comes back to life, right? So what we see throughout the canon, I believe, is a tremendous amount of apology to Anne, his wife, and Elizabeth, his first daughter, right? We also see reflections of the other two daughters that he has. He had three daughters, kind of like King Lear, for instance. There's another reflection where, okay, I have to divide this up. Which one's going to get it? Who loves me the most? Type of a thing is what we see in Lear, and I think that that's reflected in Oxford's life and his relationship with his daughters. He had one daughter who was rebellious, who was like, no, I'm not going to marry that guy. I'm going to go run off and marry the guy that I want. It blew up in her face. It was terribly tragic, but she made her own choice and got away with it. Obviously, Queen Elizabeth is a huge influence in his life, and so she's all over the canon, whether it's Titania or it's Cleopatra or right. But there are all other very powerful women. His mother-in-law, Mildred Cecil, has books dedicated to her. She was known for being a devout Puritan and ran a tight ship, and that was basically his stepmom, and then she became his mother-in-law. His wife Anne had works dedicated to her, and she was known to have learned from her mother the practice of medicine, which is why we see in All's Well That Ends Well the character Helena helping the king to overcome his ailment through medicine, right? Because she's an homage to Anne. So we also then have Anne Vavassor, who is another woman in the life of Edward de Vere. He has a tumultuous affair with her. She becomes pregnant. Both he and her and the newborn baby are all thrown into the Tower because of the laws against fornication without consent. Not without her consent, without royal consent, because she was a lady in waiting to the queen. The queen was so savagely jealous. She throws them all in jail, including the baby. Yeah, eventually lets them all out, and it all works out. But you have that whole incident occurring in his life. Then you have his second wife, who basically comes and saves him because he's in near financial ruin. She's super bright. She knows how to manage money, and she helps tighten up the resources, pay off the bills, and get them to a place of strength so that their son, the 18th Earl of Oxford, has something to inherit when his father literally disappears from the scene in June of 1603. So I think that what we see through the canon is the great presence of very strong and powerful women. And I think when we look at Edward's life, we see nothing but the presence of powerful and strong women. His father died when he was young. He has no real father figure other than William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who he hates. And no other real strong male figure in his life other than his tutors and his uncle Arthur, who both realized that he has surpassed them in intelligence at an early age in his life. So he's sort of alone, isn't he, in that sense, except for the women around him.
I think you could also argue that you could see the humanity in him, that by being surrounded by these powerful women and intelligent women, he can also appreciate that and respect that enough to put that into the works, that people should also be like that and respect that. So. All right. Who's next? Katie, do you have Keelan's question?
Yes, I can ask it for her. So she had to leave early, but she was wondering if there's any evidence that makes you think, for example, that like Bacon is not the author, or is it more just like you feel the evidence is more strong for Edward de Vere? Like, are there authors that you think, no, they definitely didn't do it, like there's evidence that shows that, or is it just stronger evidence for de Vere?
Well, so remember the earlier question about de Vere's writings and stylometrics that Ray asked? With Bacon, he was publishing his own works at the same time the works of Shakespeare are coming out. So we do have stylometrics that we can overlay, and we can say, well, Bacon's writings on these other things that he felt that he could publish are not in any way similar to the works of Shakespeare. Although it does look like, and people who've really dug into this have found that there's possibly evidence that Bacon was involved. There's certainly plenty of evidence that Bacon and Edward de Vere, Edmund Spenser, Philip Sidney, and others were involved in the creation of some sort of a secret society among the nobles, most likely what became the Rosicrucians, early levels of the Masonic lodges and temples that later develop more fully in the next century. But it seems like together they were laying the foundation for this sort of secret society of brotherhood. And so they were also then privy to each other's secrets. And that would mean that it wasn't so much a secret then, was it, if this circle of nobles are all together and they all know each other's secrets? It's a secret to the public, but not a secret to them. So, you know, they all knew who Shakespeare was. They didn't need to talk about it. They all knew who was the bastard child of this person and wasn't really the son of that person. They didn't need to talk about it outwardly. They also knew that the queen was aging and that she didn't have an heir. And they knew that that was getting very dangerous, but she had made it against the law to even talk about it. So when you have that sort of totalitarian rule where to be even overheard speaking about certain topics or revealing certain secrets could mean your immediate and painful death. You want to talk about, we have no clue what censorship is. We have like no clue. When we look about 400 years ago in Elizabethan society, there was a man, his name was John Stubbs, an unfortunate name for a man who ended up having his hand cut off by the queen because of a pamphlet he wrote against her marriage to the Duc d'Alençon. So John Stubbs writes this pamphlet encouraging the queen not to marry a French Catholic because she's the Protestant queen and they don't want any Catholics around and they don't want to return to Catholic rule of any kind. She finds out about it. She hits the ceiling. She has him brought in and she has his right hand cut off. So he literally became John with the stub. Ironic, right? Now you're telling me that John Stubbs loses his hand for writing a pamphlet against the Duc d'Alençon, but Shakespeare can write A Midsummer Night's Dream and never is even called into question. There's no record whatsoever of anyone named William Shakespeare ever being called before the Privy Council, ever being called before the Queen's spy masters, Francis Walsingham and William Cecil. But we do have evidence of not only the being called in question, but in some cases, the torture of certain writers, including Thomas Nash and Ben Jonson. So why not Shakespeare? After the Essex Rebellion, the day after a performance of William Shakespeare's Richard II, a command performance given with the purpose of trying to fuel up public response against the Queen's advisors and in favor of the Duke of Essex, Earl of Essex. The actors from the acting company are all called in before the Privy Council, and they're questioned. Who ordered this play to be performed? Why did you go through with it? What was the intention? Was this part of the rebellion? You know who isn't ever called in? The author. William Shakespeare's never called in. When King James becomes king and he is celebrating his coronation, and he is doing all of his celebratory works. He orders the performance of 8 Shakespeare plays over the Christmas revels. At the same time, one of Edward de Vere's daughters is getting married to one of the Herbert brothers, who happened to be a favorite of James. He orders 8 Shakespeare plays. Ben Jonson is there. Ben Jonson is commissioned by the court to write masques and entertainments for the king. You know who isn't there? William Shakespeare. Now, if James loved the plays of William Shakespeare so much that he has 8 of them performed over the Christmas season, and Ben Jonson is running around at the time filling in with other little plays and other little masks and intervals, why not ask your country's greatest writer to be in attendance? Because he's not a real person, that's why. Because he's a pseudonym. And everybody knew it.
Yep.
So
okay,
did that answer your question? Did it answer Katie's question?
Okay, thank you for doing that, Katie. So I'm going to cut it off on the questions because we're at the end of the class, but I'm going to allow Stephen the last word. So Stephen, tell us what we need to know.
Here's what you need to know. You need to know that it doesn't matter what I believe or what I think. What matters is what you're intrigued by. And what I always say to people who come to this mystery, whether it's for the first time or it's a return to it because somebody brought it up to them or they heard about it early in their studies and now they have a college professor who is ramming it down their throats through this class. What I always say is this. This is your journey. You are now a sleuth. You are now the mystery solver. And this is your journey. So I suggest if you're really intrigued and really interested, you go down your own rabbit hole. Don't follow mine. Don't follow Dr. Jackson's. Follow your own quest and go seek the information you're most intrigued about. If you're most curious about the Prince Tudor theories, go dive deep into that. If you're more intrigued by whether Bacon had anything to do with it, go dive deep into that. If you believe that Marlowe faked his death and then wrote the works of Shakespeare, go dive deep into that. There's great evidence that Marlowe's death was faked. Now, does that make him the author of Shakespeare? I don't think so, but I do believe he didn't actually die when they said he did. So if you are intrigued by the life of the Earl of Oxford, go dive deep into that. There are several films available to watch that I would recommend that you go look at that are light and easy to watch and fun to watch. Obviously, you have more than 170 episodes of my podcast, and you can search them by topic, by subject. I don't ever recommend to anyone go start at the beginning. Quite honestly, the first year, many of them are kind of overly scholarly and a little bit boring. So I recommend listen to like the last couple, the most recent ones, and then go look through the library for the titles that address topics you're interested in, right? And you'll find so much there to choose from. And then you can sort of bounce around. And then if you feel like, okay, well, now I need to watch it from the beginning and listen from the beginning, start binge listening, you could do that too. But I recommend bouncing around and finding the ones that are of interest to you. There's a great one about Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece called Begin at the Begin, which obviously is about where it all started, right? And why? Why did this name William Shakespeare suddenly pop up in 1593 with these 2 epic poems dedicated to this Earl, this very young Earl? That's a great place to start. So, start with the sonnets. There are wonderful episodes on the sonnets. Hank Whittemore is a great scholar who has torn apart the sonnets, and you can really dive deep into that. He has a great website too, by the way. HankWhittemore.com. It's easy to find. So I recommend you sort of, bounce around and dive into the things that most interest you. I think that's the most important. The one thing I would say that is crucial, which is take a look at what you've been told. Take a look at what the world has been told. And a lot of people say, well, for 400 years, and that's not true. The William Shakespeare of Stratford myth didn't truly fully develop until the middle of the 18th century. for about 150 years, the man from Stratford was unknown to anyone and nobody gave a shit about him until money could be made. And the beginning of it all was about money. And it was a very gregarious, outwardly spoken producer, director, actor named David Garrick, who started it all with the first festival in Stratford as an attempt to cash in on the great mythology and the dollar sign. And it's been that ever since. If you go to Stratford now, it's Shakespeare land. It's like an amusement park. And it's all about money. It's not about truth. So look, be suspicious. I think at your age and in what you're doing and what you're pursuing, be suspicious. Don't take anything for granted or as wholehearted truth, whether it comes from me or Dr. Jackson or the media or Facebook or wherever. Be suspicious of everything. And whatever you do, always keep asking questions.
And that's how Stephen actually signs off on the podcast. So, Stephen, everyone, please give Stephen a round of applause. Great job. You did a wonderful job. Students, thank you for the great questions. You all really delved into some topics that obviously you read further after Tuesday, so I appreciate that. You guys are dismissed. Stephen, if you could hang on very briefly. Liz, what's up?
Hey, Jonas, turn the sweatshirt back around. I think he has to sing the song.
It's all right. Y'all have a good weekend. But Stephen, if you and Emma can hang on, Emma does have a non-authorship question for you.
Okay, sure.
Yes. Okay, so you said that you have directed Shakespeare plays?
A lot, yes. I have my own Shakespeare company here in Southern Oregon.
Yeah. So I've read all the Shakespeare plays. I love Shakespeare a lot. And I've always thought that it would be the greatest idea ever to do like a Star Wars inspired Hamlet.
Well, that already exists.
But like the actual words of Hamlet. But like instead of it being ghosts, it's holograms. You have the lightsabers. I just think it would be great.
Okay, well,
all
so
of Shakespeare
Emma,
should just be set in Star Wars.
Okay, I'll tell you two things, Emma. One, there is a series of books. There is there's the original Star Wars, and then Empire Strikes Back, I think, are the two that have been rewritten.
That have been rewritten in Shakespeare?
In iambic pentameter, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I read those when I was like 8.
They're very entertaining and a lot of fun. And
they're great. Yes.
I looked into producing the first one and was never able to secure licensing and permission to do it on stage. And I think it's because Lucasfilm came down on them pretty hard. So, that's the thing. Again, totalitarianism of Lucas, right? Is a real thing. But also, I will tell you this. I have seen and I know of multiple productions of The Tempest that have been set on a planet, like a foreign planet, like a sci-fi version, right? Where the quote unquote shipwreck is, a space shipwreck, as opposed to a cuddy or a triple mast wooden boat. So
do you know if any of those have been filmed?
I don't know. You'd have to do some sort of a YouTube search. I'm sure you'll find something. I do know somebody who did a Star Trek version of The Tempest, including like putting red shirts on certain crew members who then disappeared, right? Kind of a thing. So, I mean, here's the thing about concept Shakespeare. I am not opposed to conceptualized Shakespearean productions. I think that they need to have a consistent flow through when you do them. And one of the things I've seen is sometimes the concept isn't fully fleshed out, or they don't commit fully to the concept throughout the production. Or they just randomly choose a concept because they happen to have the costumes or the props or whatever it is. So I think it's risky. I have produced several concept productions of Shakespeare plays that I've been very proud of. And I have some still on my list. Like, for instance, not this year, but next year, 2027, we'll be doing Julius Caesar set in mobster Chicago. With Caesar.
That's cool.
Caesar is the Don, so to speak, right? Of the Italian really family, cool. Right? So when they stab him to death, they'll use switchblade stilettos. And then Brutus will pull out his 45 and deliver the coup de grace, as it were, right before, right
so
after
cool.
A2 Brute, bang. So like that's one of my concepts that I'd like to do. You know, fedoras and three-piece suits and pinstripes and all of that.
Yes.
Because I think it works, right? Because, you know, here he is. Here's the dawn of this family trying to name himself a king, right?
Yeah.
But the Republic won't have it. So what do you end up with? You end up with the heads of several families all in a civil war is basically what the true history of the American mafia is, really, in fact. So I think that can work. I'm hoping that will work for my audiences. We did a pirate version of Two Gentlemen of Verona. I mean, after all, it has, you know, rape, pillage, and plunder. One of my favorites is we did a Gothic vampire version of Titus Andronicus. As you know,
that works.
It does.
That works.
It's a very bloody play. The Romans are the vampires, the Goths are the mortals, but then they're converted, which is a big part of that story. Is the you know, the Goths learn the Roman ways of sacrifice and death, right? And then it comes back to bite them, literally. Pardon the pun. So, you know, I think concept Shakespeare can be a lot of fun. I think it can work really well, but I think you have to be really committed to the flow through, and it has to make sense. So there you have it.
Yeah. Right. One of my favorite parts about like Shakespeare is how all the stories can, like, they work very well, obviously, in the original setting and context, but they can also be taken and put into so many different settings because it's like about, you know, human universals. So I really love coming up with different like ideas about different places you could put Shakespeare plays. I have like a whole running list for Much Ado. You could do so many things with that play.
Orson Welles was, you know, very famous, obviously, for his film Citizen Kane. But prior to that, it was his involvement with the Mercury Theater during the Great Depression, the Federal Theater Project. And, you know, one of the most famous productions that he envisioned and put together was he did sort of a voodoo Macbeth that was set in like the Zulu countries of Africa. Yeah. And it was an all black cast. You know, like 1932, 1933, an all black cast doing Shakespeare, all, you know, wearing like the traditional Zulu garb, and witch doctors instead of witches, and was, you know, rave reviews. I wish there would have been an ability to record that at that time back then.
Have you seen the Julius Caesar that's done in a similar way? I don't know if it's specifically Zulu, but it's like set like in Africa with like the witch doctors and I haven't actually seen the full thing, but I've seen clips of it.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
That one's very cool.
But here's one I'll leave you with that I have always thought about that would be good. Back to Titus Andronicus is to do it and have the Romans all dressed in U.S. cavalry costumes and have the Goths all dressed as Native American Indians. And so you have this imperialist sort of, you know, army and generals and whatnot who take these more primitive people and teach them their ways of war and violence and revenge, and it comes back on them terribly by the end. Of course, the beautiful thing about that play, it's hard to say beautiful thing about Titus Andronicus because it's so bloody and so savage. But it's an homage to the great Greek tragedies of old, right? Which is why it's so savage and bloody. But at the end, it is a play about redemption. It is a play about stopping the revenge and stopping the sacrifice of sons. And Lucius turns it around at the end, and he agrees to raise Aaron's child as a true Roman and to put an end to the back and forth suffering. So it is a story of redemption at the end. But
right. Okay, well, I will leave now, but thank you. I appreciate
that.
All right.
Stephen, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
My pleasure, Garrett. I'm glad I could be of service. I hope that it helped enrich their experience, and I'm so proud to have been a part of this because I think it's incredible what you're doing, and I think it's magnificent for those students. They obviously have been paying attention. They obviously have been considering the evidence for each of the candidates that you have proposed in class, and they're obviously developing their own sort of opinions on that evidence and theories, and I think that is exactly what education should be. And so kudos to you, friend.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really do. I have to admit, I'm so proud of myself for putting the curriculum together so they understood what you were talking about today. Because you mentioned things that I'm like, damn, I'm so glad I put that in the lecture notes for Tuesday, so they know what you were talking about. And I just really appreciate, I know you've had surgery recently and you did a wonderful job. You can't tell at all that you've had that surgery. So I appreciate you suffering through it if you were suffering.
No, not at all.
And I can tell they really enjoyed it. I've already gotten a couple of messages from Liz already. She's like, "Oh, I wish I had asked him this," that kind of thing. So I know that they're very excited about it. I'm going to be making a significant donation on the podcast, so be looking for that.
Oh, and, thank you. That's very kind.
Feel free. I'm going to ask them if they have any comments they would like to throw back at you, and feel free to talk about this on the show if you like. I'd be more than happy to give you any information.
I recorded this entire session, and so I want my listeners to be able to enjoy it and be able to hear it. Wow. So it is an episode. So there you have it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'll let them know. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
And also tell them, please let them know. I don't always respond right away because I do get lots of emails, but they can email me directly with their follow-up questions. Pass on my email address, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com.
You got it.
And they can also just go to don'tquillthepodcast.com website and click there to contact me or to find out more about the podcast and to find the episodes and whatever. I'm sure they're all young people, so they're probably, Spotify,
they're way ahead of you and
Apple. They know it all. So they're on Stitcher and all that, I'm sure. So
yeah. And I did want to comment one thing, and then I need to go. I've got some students waiting to come in. I'm so glad you mentioned only a parent would write those words, because when I was talking to them about the sonnets and this has to be DeVere writing to Rosalie, I told them, before I was a father reading the sonnets, it was all a love story to me. But it was years after my oldest daughter was a teenager. And then I'm like, you know what? This is definitely a father. This is, now I understand what my mother and father were saying to me, kind of stuff, So I'm glad you backed me up on that. So,
I real quick, just a little personal note. So, my mother passed away not long after my second daughter was born, and so I only had two children at the time. My son was born after she was gone, and but they were so young. They were 3 and a toddler when she passed. And I really didn't have all the experiences that I have now that my children are 11 and 8 and 6. And nearly every day, I wish that I could pick up the phone and call her and say, I get it now. I totally understand, Mom. Like, there are so many moments that I now have so much more appreciation for her as a parent and what she gave and did for me and how much she loved me. And so, I believe that it's true. I believe that when you look at the sonnets from that lens, it changes your whole perspective changes when you become a parent and as the years go through parenting too.
Sure.
And I think, that is definitely the key to the sonnets to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, my friend, thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you. And let me know if I can ever be of further service or whether, later on at the end of the class. Is this a full year class or just one semester?
One semester. So I'll let you know what the outcome is at the end, because they're going to be delivering their belief into who wrote it, but they're also going to argue against that person as well.
Sure.
So they're going to have
a
little
lawyer
bit of
training
a
there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They need to be their own adversary and advocate. Right.
Yeah. I'll let you know how that comes out.
Okay. So. I can't wait. That'll be great.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it, Quiller Nation. A glimpse into how the authorship mystery has been received by some young legal eagles in North Carolina. I want to thank Dr. Garrett Jackson and the students of his class at Appalachian University. And I want to thank all of you for being here every fortnight. I especially want to thank those of you who have subscribed at the serial quiller level or above. More bonus feature episodes are coming your way in the new year. Hey, and shoot me an email to tell me which movie you'd like us to feature in the next movie watch-along bonus feature that Annie and I are planning. We have a few on our list, but we'd love to hear from you about your requests and see if we can't fulfill one or more of those during our 8th season. I also want to thank our December Quiller of the Month, Patricia Carrelli, longtime friend and supporter of the program, and now our final Quiller of the Month for 2025. Patricia, congratulations, and thank you as always for being a loyal Quiller. Looking forward to our annual anniversary episode to mark the close of another year and get us started on our 8th season as we are headed toward more than 200 regular episodes before the end of 2026. Can you believe that? By the end of 2026, we'll have more than 200 episodes in the can, not to mention the 15 or more bonus feature episodes now. It is incredible to look back upon, and it has been an incredible journey, and it continues to be an incredible journey with all of you, and I thank you for joining me through this exploration. Looking forward to sharing some of your reviews and comments through the year-end stats, and the general, of course, back and forth banter between me and our very own producer, Jake. So be sure to mark that on your calendar as the first episode of 2026, our 8th annual anniversary episode. And watch for the early registration link to be revealed for our incredible monumental Shakespeare event at Gray's in London in May. More about that in the new year. And it's exciting. We've found the proper tavern for our cocktail reception the evening before. We've lined up our talent and our presenters. We have put together a magnificent list of plays and scenes that we will be presenting, along with the intro and closing of each of those scenes, explaining the legal erudition that is involved with each of those scenes. It's going to be a magnificent day of exploration into what we believe is one of the greatest legal minds of all time. So be prepared, Quiller Nation, to join us in London in May. And until then, have a happy new year and keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.